Hi, I'm Francine Banner, a lawyer and associate professor of sociology at UM-Dearborn. My research area is gender and law, and today I have the exciting and challenging task of engaging the gender chapter of Kendi's How to Be an Antiracist. When I was in college, we had something called distribution requirements, which meant that you had to take classes across a range of subject matters. For non-science majors like myself, the college offered a class called Chemistry for the Liberal Arts major, which we all called Chemistry for Cooks. At the time, I recall thinking that the term was a bit derogatory, meaning that it would be chemistry light or chemistry dumbed down for English majors like me. However, in time, I came to see that what the class actually taught was, in fact, that chemistry is fundamental to cooking. It undergirded everything: temperature, texture, flavor. Chemistry was there all along. It supported the whole structure, but my own background, fears, and perspective caused me not to see it. In that spirit, as I consider Kendi's book, I see it much less as bringing something new to what were unrelated discussions, but making visible something that has been here all along, but that we have not taken the time to adequately appreciate or address. Although Kendi offers a lot in this chapter, I want to focus primarily on one concept he introduces, and that's intersectionality. As Kendi describes, the term intersectionality was introduced by law professor Kimberly Williams Crenshaw in 1989. Crenshaw uses the term to describe something specific: discrimination against Black women, who often faced a double bind of being discriminated against in terms of race and discriminated against in terms of gender. Her inspiration for identifying intersectionality was a 1976 case called de Graaf and Reed versus General Motors, which, although not a Michigan case, may be of interest to some on our campus because it involves the auto industry and union disputes. GM only started employing Black women in the 1960s. In the 1970s, they had a practice of hiring only men for line jobs and only white women for jobs in the office. Jobs on the line were integrated. Black men were hired. However, office jobs were only offered to white women. When budget cuts caused massive layoffs at GM, Black women were disproportionately impacted. A group of these women brought suit under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, arguing that they had been denied employment and advancement opportunities at the company. However, the court held that the plaintiffs could not win because discrimination claims were only available as single-axis claims. One could argue discrimination in terms of race, or one could argue discrimination in terms of gender. One could not argue the effects of both of them together. The plaintiffs effectively had no legal argument because GM did employ people of different races in the factory, and they did employ people of different genders in the office. Today, 40 years after de Graaf and Reed, it still remains difficult to bring discrimination plus arguments based on how a person experiences the unique and intersecting impacts of oppression and harassment. A good way to introduce intersectionality in a group setting can be providing participants with a blank wheel that shows the self at the center and spaces surrounding the self. Participants can then fill in their wheel with what they see as the aspects of their identity that are significant, considering factors like age, race, ethnicity, immigration status, disability status, sexual orientation, socioeconomic factors, mental illness, learning differences, gender identity, body type, connection to the carceral system, and many, many more. People should be asked to reflect on the ways these impact a person's engagement with the world, and importantly, how they affect how the world interacts with them. Intersectionality can bring home the point that, for example, someone who is LGBTQ may not experience the world in the same way as someone who's straight. Someone who's LGBTQ and, for example, Chaldean may experience the world differently than someone like me, an able-bodied, atheist, cisgender lesbian professor. Looking at identity in an intersectional way also brings attention to how our assumption is sometimes when we say race, we're signaling we're going to be speaking about people who are non-white. If we say we're going to talk about gender, people assume we are going to be speaking about women. Or if we signal that we're going to discuss sexual identity, Often the assumption is that we're then going to discuss LGBTQ issues. White, male, able-bodied, straight are often treated as default categories, what some scholars call a view from nowhere. Intersectionality draws our attention to the ways in which whiteness, or being cisgendered, or being able to hear or to see, are not merely default categories. These are identities that impact our engagement with the world. Kendi makes this point in the Power chapter when he says many white people resist being identified as white, but in fact being white impacts a person's relationship to US history and to identity in a way that's different if they were from another race. Whether in a book club or in the classroom, I want to suggest that while it's a great exercise to talk about intersectionality, it's important not to force sharing unless participants are inspired to do so. It is challenging to leap into deeply held and intimate beliefs without laying a foundation for openness and trust. In the book, Kendi provides many examples from his own life that can be used to engage this concept without putting people on the spot. Another caution is that while it's always useful, in my opinion, to reflect on people's own experiences, sometimes the idea of intersectionality can suggest a false equivalency that may not account for privilege or power. Barbara Tomlinson describes intersectionality as having a power problem of power blindness and color blindness. For example, a person who receives an intersectionality wheel might fill it out. I am too popular. I was too smart as a child. People don't understand my family because we're so wealthy. Or my healthy eating and my incredible fitness often cause people to judge me. As educators and as caring people, we should be attentive to the ways in which our fellow humans feel these oppressions very personally. But we also should bring attention to the fact that these are not structural oppressions. These are not engagements with the world that usually negatively impact the ability to secure a loan, to be considered for a job, or to be called on in a classroom. In discussing privilege, I like to use the example of the elephant and the mouse. If we have an elephant and a mouse in a room, the elephant often will not be aware the mouse exists, but the mouse always has to be aware of the elephant's behavior. In the example, the elephant may not be ill-intentioned. In fact, to become aware that a mouse is sharing the room with you, and then to take an additional step to be helpful to the mouse, an elephant would have to expend a lot of attention and effort. For most of us, there's a mix in life. There are situations in which we are very comfortable in blundering elephants, and there are others in which we are mice. Intersectionality is useful in discussing many of the topics raised by Kendi in this chapter and in the book. In particular here, the tropes he mentions of the Black patriarch and Black matriarch, and the ways these affected his own upbringing and the lives of other Black families. Intersectionality is useful in thinking through the ways expectations of family and norms have impacted Black and white families differently, and also in thinking through how our own family and individual life experiences have encouraged us either to conform to or to challenge societal expectations of us. In conclusion, I want to offer that Kendi offers a lovely statement, which is that our ideas too often dance a cappella, meaning if we don't speak with other people about the thoughts we have, maybe because they make us uncomfortable or we feel we don't have the correct terminology to discuss them, or perhaps families raised us to think that talking about these things wasn't polite. This makes us more inclined as individuals and as a society to rely on racist, sexist, ableist, homophobic, and other stereotypes. To be anti-racist, we need to talk about these issues. And I think our campus, whether it's an in-person or a virtual campus, is an outstanding place to do just that.